Tempted to add a Kyosho 2WD Legendary Series buggy to your collection, but not sure which one to go for? Well, stick around, stay tuned, and I'll tell you all you need to know about Kyosho's 2WD Legendary Series buggies. Hey there, how's it going? My name is David and you're watching Kai City RC. On today's video, we'll take an in-depth look at the 2WD Kyosho Legendary Series buggies. This video will cover all the quirks and features of the current re-releases, including the Scorpion, the Turbo Scorpion, the Beetle, the Tomahawk, and the Ultima. So if you're interested, let's dive in. I think we should start with a timeline first. So the Scorpion and Beetle were originally released in 1982. The Tomahawk came next in 83, the Turbo Scorpion in 85, and the Ultima, new kid on the block, 1987. As the Ultima is significantly different to the others, I'll come back to that later on in this video, and we'll concentrate first on the older four. So the older four use the same basic chassis layout, suspension design, and drivetrain. The chassis is based around aluminium rails onto which all of the other components mount. The Scorpions and the Beetle feature a plastic bathtub electronics box. However, in an effort to reduce weight, the Tomahawk does away with that, and instead you get a aluminium servo mount deck and a short plastic upper deck. They all use trailing arm front and rear suspension, and they have really good quality oil-filled dampers. The Turbo Scorpion has several less obvious upgrades over the others, including bigger shocks and wheels. Now, for more information on the differences, check out my first 2WD Legends review, link in the description. Now, price-wise, what I'll do is I'll quote you the local MSRP here in Japan for Kyosho. Kyosho won 32,000 yen for the Scorpion and Beetle, while the Tomahawk and Turbo Scorpion cost slightly more at 35,000 yen. Now, unlike Tamiya, Kyosho choose to modernize, upgrade, and generally improve upon their original designs with their re-releases. So as such, there are numerous small differences between the re-releases and their vintage counterparts. And these differences make them easy to work on, more robust, and just generally more suited to modern day electronics. Now, Mick over at RC Hobby Shed did a fabulous in-depth comparison between the vintage and re-release Ultima. I highly recommend you go and check that video out. You will be so surprised at just how many small differences there are. Now, Kyoshos all use hex hardware throughout with countersunk screws on the chassis underside. The gearboxes feature gear diffs and they come partially assembled, though I do recommend you tear down the diff and do a better job of greasing the gears. Now, in some cases the shocks come pre-assembled, though you will need to partially dismantle them to add oil and the little Kyosho oil seal. Now, heads up, this oil seal is a right pain to install. They all use 48 pitch gears and they all come with a slipper clutch too. And naturally, the kits come with full bearings. Looking at you, Tamiya. With the exception of the Turbo Scorpion and Ultima, the kits all use small diameter rear wheels, and I think this really adds to the vintage looks of the buggies. The Scorpion, the Tomahawk, the Beetle, they use friction fitting wheel hubs at the rear. It's quite an old design, but it is possible to replace them with the Turbo Scorpion hex adapter and then run Turbo Scorpion wheels or aftermarket wheels as well. Next, what's in the box? Well, don't be put off by box art. Kyosho's box art is nowhere near as nice as Tamiya's, that's a given, but it's a different story on the inside. Everything is neatly laid out with the key components presented in blister packs. It's always tough to break into them to start the build, but like Tamiya, Kyosho include greasers and a few simple tools to get you started. Sadly, Kyosho does not include a motor with their kits, nor does it come with an ESC, which incidentally Tamiya kits intended for the domestic market do not include an ESC either. I think a lot of people might be put off by the apparent high cost of the Kyosho kits, especially when you compare them to many of Tamiya's kits, but given the extensive use of metal parts, I think the premium is justified. For Tamiya kits of comparable quality, you're looking at SRB chassis, and then the cost is almost the same. Okay, onto the build experience. As the buggies use hex hardware throughout, you will definitely need to get a good set of hex drivers for assembly. The quality of the parts is top notch, and all but the Ultima are composed mostly of metal parts. Assembly is straightforward, many components come pre-assembled. Kyosho's instructions, on the other hand, they lack the detail of Tamiya's, but on the plus side they feature exploded views of the chassis and sub-assemblies, as well as a very extensive list of spare and option parts. I really do like how Kyosho do their manuals in that they use a methodical use of parts bags. What I mean by that is, you start assembly with bag A, you use everything in bag A, and only when you've finished using bag A will you need to use open bag B. It means that you don't have to go hunting through various bags to find screws, nuts, washers, etc. Now you do get spare parts, but they're included in a separate spare parts bag. As I mentioned earlier, I highly recommend you dismantle the pre-built diffs, as they are not very well greased from the factory. There are only a couple of other points to be careful with when building the kits. The first being the blocks that hold the front arm shaft onto the chassis rails. When you tighten them down, the arm can rotate out of alignment if you don't tighten them down evenly at the same time. Additionally, you may be tempted to tighten the blocks down all the way so that they sit flush with the chassis rails. However, this is not necessary, and you are highly likely to strip the thread in the soft aluminium blocks. I'm speaking from experience here. The rear suspension posts that hold the shafts onto which the rear trailing arms rotate have tapered sides to them, and it's not very clear in the manual, but you must orientate them correctly, otherwise the suspension will brine. Now, Bryan, he did an excellent build video recently on the Scorpion where he actually covers this, so go check that out too. Also, be careful not to omit the black O-ring that attaches between the body pin and the plastic spur gear cover. The bodies of the Scorpions have an integrated driver figure which you'll need to paint on the inside before painting the remainder of the body. Many of the details on the driver, the cockpit, such as stripes, belts, etc. are completed with decals, so it isn't necessary to be very accurate when painting the driver figure. I do like Kyosho's decals. Kyosho provide pre-cut decals plus a large extra sheet of logo decals to customize the body shell as you wish. That said, if you are planning to go box art, especially the Turbo Scorpion, be aware that the stripes are all decals applied after painting the body white. Now those decals are an absolute nightmare to get right, so you might want to consider masking and painting the blue areas instead. Now Glenn over at RC Legends recently completed a Turbo Scorpion build where he decided to go the decal route, and to use his words, I think he said it was horrendous. In my case, I painted the body of the Turbo Scorpion white as per the instructions, and then proceeded to make a right mess of the blue stripes. In the end, I pulled them off and went with the color scheme you see here. So consider yourself warned, if decals aren't your forte, you might want to consider painting the blue stripes. There is ample space in the Scorpions and Beetles for electronics, and the battery holder will accept most batteries without issue. On the Tomahawk, however, the electronics live beneath the driver figure, so space is a little tighter, but a smallish ESC such as a Hobbywing 1060 will fit okay. All the buggies run around 6.9:1 stock gearing, but come with optional pinion and spur gears to change that to 8.3:1. Kyosho recommend either their brushless Le Mans 240S ESC, a very nice looking ESC but a bit expensive, paired with their Le Mans 240S 19.5 turn brushless motor. Now for brushed, they recommend the Kyosho KA060-91W. It's a 60 amp brushed ESC. It's basically a rebranded Hobbywing 1060. They recommend that and their Le Mans 490 30 turn brushed motor. It's a very nice looking motor. 30 turns sounds like it might be on the slower side, but as the buggy's stock gearing is 6.9:1, it means it goes pretty well. It's not fast. I tried running a Tamiya Sport Tune in the Beetle with standard gearing, but found the motor ran too hot. All of them will run lipos and brushless without a problem, so no need to worry there. Overall, the build experience is excellent. That said, while I give Kyosho top marks for parts quality, they are less than stellar when it comes to ensuring the correct parts are included in the box. Speaking from experience, and in my case, my Turbo Scorpion shipped with the standard Scorpion's roll bar, so it had no light bucket attachment points. My Tomahawk, as I recall, was missing a few screws, and most recently my Beetle came with several button head screws that should have been cap head screws. But don't let that put you off. I'm sure this is like the exception rather than the rule. Durability. In a word or two, very good. Thus far, the only issue I've had is a slight oil leak on the optional HG shocks fitted to the Scorpion. Other than that, nothing of note. I recommend you apply thread lock to all the metal to metal fittings and check to see if any have worked loose during your first shakedown run. But full disclosure, I don't run my buggies hard and I certainly don't bash them, so your mileage may vary. Performance. Well, you don't really buy vintage re-release models for performance, but they're pretty good. Given how old the design is, they handle remarkably well. The suspension is smooth and well damped and remains composed on rougher terrain. While they are certainly not up to modern high-end racing buggy standards, I think most people would be very surprised by just how well they handle. Certainly, if you're expecting handling characteristics like Tamiya's SRB or RV chassis, then you are in for a treat. That's not a knock against Tamiya, but a lot of their old school suspension designs don't work very well. I'm currently building a Frog and the rear suspension on that is awful. Yeah, the Kyosho suspension is very good even for a vintage design. Now the Turbo Scorpion with its longer wheelbase and wider tread feels more planted and has greater stability, especially mid-corner. On smoother surfaces, the soft compound used on the Turbo Scorpion front tires gives you plenty of grip and kind of reduces understeer. The Scorpions and the Beetle all have a battery mounted longitudinally in the center of the chassis. Now, as I use heavier nickel metal hydride batteries, the added weight towards the front of the buggy helps to mitigate understeer and give it a bit more grip at the front. However, the Tomahawk's battery mounts transversely towards the rear of the buggy. Now it adds weight over the rear axle but reduces it over the front. You get better traction, but the Tomahawk tends to understeer a lot more than the others, and it's the most willing to wheelie. One thing I like about the Tomahawk, a bit of an aside here, but because it's got no wing and the body is very low profile, the rear tires look absolutely huge on the buggy. I really do like the look. Now, with the exception of the Turbo Scorpion, the others use blocky, super soft rear tires, and you get a lot more traction in muddy, rougher or looser terrain. That said, the hard compound used on the front tires is awful. If you run on hard surfaces like concrete or asphalt, you will need to change that because they will not turn. All of the older buggies, they have limited adjustment for suspension geometry, so there's not really a lot of fine tuning you can do. You can play around with the trailing arms at the front, but that's about it really. That brings me on to the fifth and final two-wheel drive re-release from Kyosho, the Ultima. It's the newest of the bunch, originally released in 1987. The design is much more akin to modern day buggies. It also shares many similarities with the four-wheel drive Ultima and Javelin, etc. So gone are the chassis rails and trailing arm suspension. Instead, the Ultima uses aluminium monocoque frame and double wishbone suspension, which is basically straight off the Optimus. The Ultima is by far the most expensive at 42,000 yen as well. Although it uses a lot more plastic, the plastic is of very high quality. The shocks are bigger and the suspension geometry can be fine-tuned, including camber and rear toe in. In many ways, the Ultima is very similar to the Optima and Javelins when it comes to design, particularly suspension. So if you've built any of the four-wheel drive Legendary Series buggies, you'll be on familiar ground with the Ultima. The small, and I do mean small, the small polycarbonate body has a laughable molded driver figure and integrated roll cage. The rear wing on the re-releases is now hard plastic, so it's a bit more durable. The kit comes with full bearings for the drivetrain, but Kyosho decided not to include it for the steering, so you get metal bushings for the steering crank. As the design is so different to the other four, the handling is also very different as well. So looking at the 5 buggies as a whole, the Ultima is undoubtedly the best performer and the most suited to higher powered motors and track work. So if you're after superior performance, you don't mind paying the price, the Ultima is the obvious choice. That said though, for me personally, it is my least favorite of the bunch, simply because I prefer the old style design of the others. I find it much more appealing. If you're looking for something that has a very different design to modern day buggies and something that oozes vintage style, and for a build that is a refreshing change, then any of the older chassis rail buggies would be my choice. So of the 4 ladder frame chassis buggies, which one do I recommend? It's a tough decision and I get asked this question a lot. If I'm honest, I don't think you would lose anything by just choosing the one you like the look of the most. The Tomahawk has a light, nimble feel to it, and it seems to glide over everything in its path, but it also feels the least robust of the bunch, and all the electronics are somewhat exposed to the elements. Also, for the Tomahawk, installing the battery requires removal of the body, which is something I prefer not to do. The Beetle has the unique charm and looks of a VW bug design, and its body is much larger than the others, so you've got a greater canvas to work on, painting and customization wise. The Scorpion is essentially the same as a Beetle underneath. I think some people might be put off by the Scorpion simply because the box art, the photo on the box isn't that great, and I think a lot of people are not too keen on the color scheme, but Kyosho offers so many optional parts, so you can change the color of the electronics box, the wheels, the wings, etc., and you can just modify it to just look however you want it to. But since I think most people really want a recommendation from me, well, let's see, objectively, which one would I recommend? Well, when you take into account build experience, design, performance, my vote would have to be with the Turbo Scorpion. Reason being, not only is it a great looking buggy, but you've got ease of battery installation, you've got the sealed electronics box, and you've got slightly better performance to boot. So the Turbo Scorpion is my recommendation. Plus, when completed, the Turbo Scorpion has this air about it. It's really hard to define. The longer wheelbase, the wider track, the bigger wheels, and the roll bar result in a buggy that appears to be much larger than the others, almost as if it's on a different scale. Yeah, it's slightly more expensive than a standard Scorpion, but in my opinion well worth the extra. The Turbo Scorpion has this presence about it that I don't think photos or video do justice. And if you're still undecided, remember that because the older 4 are so similar in design and construction, it's pretty straightforward to convert one into another, and this is especially true for the Scorpion and Beetle. I'll end here with a word of caution. Buying your first Kyosho Legendary Series re-release is exactly that, your first, because I can promise you it won't be your last. To say that they are addictive would be an understatement. They are some of the finest RC buggies ever produced. There, consider yourself warned. Well, if you made it to the end of this video and enjoyed it, I'd be very grateful if you gave it a thumbs up. Subscribe for more content like this, and if there's anything else you'd like to see me cover on this channel, let me know in the comments below. For stills, check out Instagram. My name is David and you've been watching Kai City RC.